Okay, we're continuing the Maamar again, slowly, short shiurim, no rush. Hopefully, we'll finish it before Hanukkah. So we're going to bring up the text. And the Maamar Padah Besholom Nafshi from the year Tafshin Lamed Vav, 1975, end of 75, going to 76, which the Rebbe said in honor of the Chag HaGeula, the redemption of the Mittel Rebbe, who passed away and was born on the 9th of Kislev, and his day of redemption was the year before he passed away, which is of the 10th of Kislev. So he didn't even complete a full year. And this is a mimer on the topic of this week's parsha, connected to the idea of Vayetze, starting off on the pasuk of Padah Besholom, trying to establish the idea of what does it mean to have a Padiyah, redemption, Shalom, in a peaceful way. And we're talking about the levels of Machama. Means there's a way to redeem, to basically to have a war, and you win the war. So you have you have a Padiyah, you have redemption of the situation. But there's three ways for that to happen. One is that there's still an enemy, and you have to restrain yourself. We're talking about a person within themselves. So you have the Yetzer, and you have to exercise a skafi restraint, which means that you still have the desires and the want, but you're overcoming your temptation to either not do what you shouldn't do, or to do what you don't want to do, and meaning to do what Hashem wants you to do, on all the levels of iskafi, not just on actual Torah mitzvahs, ma'asis, and actions, but even on a higher level, a more elevated level of connecting to the kavanah of what the intention is, even in a situation where you have no desire to do so. So you're overcoming what's required from you in a way of iskafi, restraining yourself. Then there's the level of ishapcha, where you fight the enemy, engage the enemy, but transform. And now the enemy itself is a force on the side of good, of holiness, but there's casualties in that as well. Because like David HaMelech, although David HaMelech was able to battle and to win and be victorious, but because he was a person of battle, he's not a person of peace, he couldn't build a Beis HaMikdash, he couldn't build a temple. And then you have the example of Shlomo HaMelech, who, when he faces an issue, automatically the enemy disappears. There is no enemy, there's no fight, there's no battle. But it's not that you have to battle, because even in transformation, there's first an enemy, and you have to start with restraining, and then you could transform. It means to work in this hapcha, self-transformation, that the negative within you becomes a force of positive. And again, it's not just that you don't have the negative, you actually have the negative turned into a force of positive. Because we know that the nefesh of Bahamas, the animal soul, is much more powerful, stronger, and more effective in certain ways than the nefesh alikis when it's utilized for good. But that itself also has, like the Rebbe says, it goes through a process of yisurim, pain, and suffering in order to get there. Now we're holding over here v'hine. Habediyah ba'ifin shel shalom. What does it mean to have a peace, a redemption in a peaceful way? Who it is? So we're talking about within the person. What part of you, meaning to say, so we say that there's his hapcha, this transformation, and there's the skafia and there's restraint. And we're saying in order to get to his hapcha, to transform yourself, you have to first start with the engagement. That's self. There's an enemy that has to be transformed. What part of you does a person have within themselves that becomes the conscious person of being, that when he faces an adversary, the adversary it's not a battle, it's automatically a redemption in a peaceful way. I mean, what energy within inside yourself, what kind of level of consciousness are you at, that there's no negative force that could stand up to that. There's no battle. I mean, there has to be something deep within inside every person. That's not usually something you could tap into. You could be conscious that's revealed, but if it is revealed, there is no adversary. There's no other side. So he explains that we know that the neshama, the soul of a person, is divided into 5 levels: nefesh, ruach, and neshama chayachida. So we have the 3 conscious levels correspond to machshava, dibur, ma'aseh, speech, thought, speech, and action. So the part of the person that's functional within this world And then which is pnimi, is also how you function in an internal way with your internal koiches. Then you have a makif, means when there's a revelation of the encompassing energy. We know that the encompassing energy is there's a plus and a minus. The minus is you can't internalize it, but it's reaching into such powers that is out. It's so overwhelming, can't even be contained. And in that, there's two levels: there's chai and yechida. So chai is also encompassing, but it's accompanying that also there's an encompassing energy of negative. The only level within the person's soul that has nothing to counter it on the negative side is the yechida, which is the essence of the soul. In the word yachid, it's singular, there's nothing else. When that is conscious and functioning within the person, there is no adversaries. There is no nefesh of Bahamas, there is no animalistic soul, there is no koach hatuma, koach of power of impurity that can that's even an adversary. But in order, so there's a situation, but if you could reveal in this situation the yechida, the essence of your soul, so then it's a Padah Besholom. Then you're redeeming yourself in a peaceful way. That's what he says over here. How can a person, what tool do you have within yourself? What part of your character, what part of your essence you have within yourself that you could have a padiyah, a redemption of a situation? Means there's a situation, but you could redeem, you get through the situation without any adversaries, with a peaceful way. When the service of the person is conscious and functioning with mitzad b'chinas chiv d'b'shnefesh, that the essence of your soul, again, this is the highest point of your soul, the yachid, the part it's that where creator meets creation, where creator meets the soul, the chelik alikai, the part of God that's within every person, and that's revealed, yechida shebenefesh. So there's nothing counter to that. If that's the consciousness that the person's operating at, so any situation that you get through, there's no adversary. Why? He explains like this. Line number 2. There are times that we serve Hashem. Means this is all part of Avodah. Means we have Avodah means like ibadairis, like we say, beating the hides. We're pushing through. We're going through the grind, like we say. And how do you do it? What tools do you have usually to get through the grind of Avodah, of service of God? Is your internal, functional, conscious parts of yourself. So if you have your machshava, let's say your levushim, your garments of thought, speech, and action, or even the soul itself, you have the esesphiros, the 7 emotions and 3 intellectual components or parts of yourself. Spheros are attributes, let's say, within yourself. So you have chesed, you have the parts of yourself that are chesed, you have the parts of yourself that are, you have your mind, and those things you could have, like there's zelu masad, there's the opposite. The nature of the chesed in holiness also has a nature of chesed in impurity, like we learned about in Sfiras Omer, that the idea of the Sfiras Omer is to transform. And that's why it's this, the Omer sacrifice is animal feed, because we're dealing with the nefesh Bahamas, the animal soul. And we're dealing with the 7 emotions of the animal soul that needs to be transformed to holiness. So there's there's an enemy. So when you're dealing with your kochas panimim, so you have strengths. Each person has it, and the strengths, you want to put it into a single word, would be character. Both your emotional and intellectual character, or abilities. So you have that your mind could work for thinking holy things, your mind could work for scheming in bad things. You have your heart, your emotions could respond in a holy way, in a proper way, in a selfless way, in a godly way, or it could be a selfish, self-centered way, but ego and your own agenda. So that's the zelu mosel, so the kim, that a person battles with that within themselves. That's why we always say that it's always good to have another person, or to use different emotions together, because you could attack the nefesh Bahamas. The nefesh Bahamas is very selfish. It's so selfish that it doesn't even mix the characters with each other. When you're the nefesh of the kiss, because the godly soul has a higher purpose, you can team up with different parts of your character to attack, so to say, the single character of the negative that wants to express itself. But that's really strategy. That's kind of the battle of the enemy. Hainu, meaning to say, in the parentheses, Shieshnu Metzia Shalom, you have the other side, Minagid, which means an enemy. And then how do you deal with the negative pull within your character? We're talking about all this is a battle within the person themselves. So you have 2 ways to deal with it. Avodah diskapia means you have the part of you, the animal that has this urge for something, and you have to restrain it. Iskafi means to restrain it, to limit it, to hold it back, not to give into those temptations. And then you have eventually the Avodah V'Sapcha that you transform, that your desires, your emotions, your wants are only for godliness. But again, that's a process. You have to first identify it, deal with it, and transform it. There's casualties, so to say. There's the assurance, the suffering. So that's the first three levels are the internal, the functioning part within you. You even have the makib, kind of an external power, which is the chaya, which is the, so to say, kind of you could call it the rotzin, the want, things that are not within, so to say, your it's not starting from the wisdom, from your chachma. Let's say it's the emotions that are connected beyond the chachma, beyond the seichel, beyond the intellect. It's an encompassing energy. But it's also an encompassing energy, so to say, an out of body, so to say, kind of energy that the negative forces have. It means higher than something that's internalized. Like it says about the chaya de babu islu, so to say, a counter, a shadow to it. You're tapping into the fifth element of your soul, which is the highest level, the yechida, which is the oneness of your soul. That's stripped. It means the difference in chaya and yechida is that chaya is also still an expression of a functionality. It functions outside the limitations of space. It's not internalized. It's an external kind of energy that you could get that's not usually something you would tap into, but it's kind of, you rely on it. It's like, I have to get into my super mode. But that's you dress into super mode. That's something you could do super mode for negative also, where you're overachieving out of your, so to say, your limitations, but it's part of who you are. The yechida is not a deeper way of overachieving. It's actually stripped of any kind of identity. It's the essence, the simplicity of the person's soul, and that is conscious within the person. So he says, when you're avodah with Hashem is with the highest element of your soul, the oneness of your soul. That there is no negative counterpart to that. There is, because the essence is the essence. Everything else is just a facade. The essence is the real you. Now, in order for there to be a hero choice, however you want to look at it, there's the counter, there's the other side, there's the nefesh Bahamas. But when it comes to the essence of the real you, the essence, the way you are stripped of any identity or any kind of character, there's nothing on the other side of that. There's nothing to the other side that's counter to this oneness of your soul. That's what we call it. The name is called Yechida. Chaya means like you're alive. Yechida means oneness. And not one as an echad of a combination of things that makes up one. It's Yechid is singular. That's stripped of any components. And that's how. And that's the consciousness that you're doing your service of Hashem. So then when any situation you're doing it, it's so connected, it's so absolute, it's so MS, it's so true, that as you get through these situations, it's all Besholom, it's a peaceful way. Any scenario that you face, you redeem yourself in that scenario because it's what's functioning is Yechida, there's no other side. And it's able to be super focused and exact and online and 100% in every situation. Shalom amiti, that's true peace. Shalom b'shalom, then it's peace and tranquility. Like we said, it's not peace with after a fight, after a battle. Because when you're functioning on that level, there's no enemy, there's no other side. So you're accomplishing, and there's, so to say, it's a situation you have to accomplish something. It's not just that you're streamlining. It's just everything's going easy. So that doesn't mean that it's easy. It just means that it's clear what you have to do. You're not struggling with anything. You're not transforming anything. But B'dugma gives an example. When was there a time where someone functioned on such where people functioned on such a level? Shalom, as it was by King Solomon. He was the person of tranquility. Even from in comparison to his father, King David, Ishum Shibiyama, because in the days of King Solomon was such a level of absolute, at least in the beginning. In the Chatchilai Hayim Milchamas, there was never battles. When could say the Jewish people were at their highest level, which is the 15th generation, like it says, the full moon. That we had with the building of the first temple. That's why it has to happen in Solomon's times. Because he's to establish a home for God, the base of Mikdash. There has to be in the time of Shlomo Melech where there's no adversaries. You have to be so in tune, so in touch, and so conscious of the essence of your soul that you could bring something so limitless into a limited space of this world. That God should dwell and have the base of Mikdash in this space. That God told to David, "You're not going to be building the temple, a house in my name. You're going to have a son. Who yivne by Shmi? King Solomon's going to build. Shlomo Melech is going to build. But why? As King Mavur, because of Shem, as the pasuk continued, Mishum Shehu Yeh Ish Menucha, he's going to be a man of peace. Shalom Sheket, and there's going to be peace, tranquility, and quiet. Etem B'yamav is going to be in his days. So what we answer now is that, so we said in this paragraph is that the idea of that David HaMelech talks about the concept of Padah Besholom Nafshi, which is the idea of to be redeemed of a situation in a peaceful, tranquil way. How do you do that? What tools does the person have to dig into? What do you have access to that you could get in, you could face any situation and be able to overcome it without even fighting the adversary? There is no adversary. Is when what you're functioning on is your chida, your essence of your soul. Now he continues. There's more to be said about to understand the difference of the 5 components of the soul and what is the difference between Chai Yechida. But then I think fundamentally what you could say is Chai Yechida is not just a difference in depth or width. It's although they're both encompassing, but there's encompassing, which is an expansion of your character, and it's encompassing stripped of any character. Chaya is the expansion that your characters know that there's part of you that's not limited to, so to say, to be internalized, or it's beyond being internalized, but it's an expansion of your. Put it this way: different people have different levels of chaya, because it's a makiv, it's an encompassing of you. Yechida is not. It's beyond you, so to say. It's the essence stripped of any identity. He explains, he continues, now based on what we just said, what does it mean to be redeemed in a true way of peace? Not the peace of after you overcome an adversary, but there is no adversary, there's no force against what you're trying to accomplish. That the definition, the true definition of peace, is when this tranquility and calmness, menucha, which is in the way of calm. And why could you have this situation of tranquility and proper peace? Is because there is no level of menagid, there's no enemy when that kind of consciousness is within the person. Immediately that you have to battle with. Movements understood. When is there such a time that we're going to be focusing on such high levels? Only when real Mashiach comes. In time to come. The Hare Oz like it says, why there's going to be a time when Mashiach comes. That is there will be no enemy. God will get rid of any of the spirit of the negativity, the spirit of impurity. So therefore, if there's no forces of evil, so then you're going to have absolute peace and absolute tranquility. There's no enemy. And therefore, you'll be able to have an existence, even in the physical sense, of Ga'ar Ze'evim Keves. This sheep is not going to be fearful of the wolf, because although within the system of creation, in the ecosystem of creation, there's the animal kingdom that runs, that there's either you're being the hunted or you're the hunter or the hunted, and that keeps nature going. We're just talking with someone how when in Yellowstone National Park they eliminated they hunted all the wolves, so the whole Yellowstone National Park started to fall apart, because you need the ecosystem, you need the system, the cycle of the hunted and the hunting and the hunter and the hunted, and that allows for things for certain, that tension allows for things to grow. Otherwise, the antelope which is eating all the trees, nothing was growing. So Mashiach comes, but nevertheless, that still comes from a negative force, that the wolf is eating the sheep. Derech says Shar HaPratim because of the other details that it talks about Mashiach's comes in Mashiach's times, where there's signs of peace. There will be no more battles, etc. Weapons will be turned into plows. Obviously, the peace that we're going to have in Mashiach's times is going to be absolute peace, even greater than the peace we have in Shlomo. Shlomo is like this great light that gets rid of any enemies. In times of Mashiach, it's going to be it's not a force that gets rid of the enemies, a revelation of a force, but it's going to be, then the enemies doesn't exist anymore. God's going to get rid of the whole negative force. But based on the rule that we know, the Rebbe says in the Bible. Because like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, that the world is going to be in existence for 6,000 years, and the 7,000th year, which basically incidentally we have 214 years left to the 6,000 years. And the early days of Mashiach has to be included in those 214 years. For Mamish, very little time for Mashiach to come, even according to the Talmud based in Sanhedrin, which says, and most people, there's no real opinion that argues with that Shisa V'Shin Havayom, the world will exist only 6,000 years. So in the things that we're going to have when Mashiach comes have to have some sort of comparison in our Avodah today. It means although we're not living today in a time where there's that kind of revelation or kind of vacuum of anything negative, but there has to be something like that in our time, because anything that's going to happen with Mashiach was started and built on our Avodah. It means Mashiach coming in the time of the Asad Lavai is not an existence that has nothing to do with the 6,000 years. The 6,000 years that we're doing Avodah, and Avodah in a difficult way, allows for there to be the Mashiach's times. And because it allows and creates the setting for Mashiach's times, we have to have a similar in the times of now, that the times of Mashiach are an elevated level from that, but it has to have something similar now. Again, he says, based on the rules, all the revelations that are going to be lost when Mashiach comes, the dependent. In our service, in the 6,000 years, meaning the times of this time before lost love, before Mashiach comes. It's not just and specifically, where's the real time that's preparing and getting the world ready for Mashiach is the time of the diaspora, the time of the galus of the exile. Befrat and Befratius, and even more so within this, so to say, the 2,000 years that we've been in diaspora and exile. The main part that actually is the transformation from galus, from galus to geula, from exile to redemption, is the happenings in the ikifus of the Mashiach, in the footsteps of Mashiach. And we're holding the last moments of the galus. Over there, we have already that transformation. We have a little bit of that. It's like that. It's the mix where there's things that are happening, even though we're still in galus, that have this flavor of how it's going to be with Mashiach. Sha'azu mati ikvim beikvim, because it's going to be like the heels meeting the heels of the galus, the end of Mashiach, the end of galus is going to hit into the heels of Mashiach, the beginning of Geula. As ot, like the Rebbe says in Yiddish, as ot kun Mashiach tzidkeinu, the Mashiach is about to come, so it's moving. Gamkim negela mavur leil shegam b'meshach zman hagosach b'choshek kafel mekupul dikfus Mashiach. So yes, although that now we're in the darkness of Galus, and not just the darkness, the double darkness of the last minutes of Mashiach, of Galus. We know that the footsteps, the last part of the darkness of the night is the darkest part. Nevertheless, Yeshnam Kolafanam and Abba Sodom, we have all the components of Shalom. The Eskafi, Hisabcha, and the way to reach means that the restraining transformation, which is also a battle, but you have to reach the transformation, though the conclusion is higher. And the level where you reveal the Yechidah of an Nefesh, essence of your soul, where there is no enemy. And we have that component till today as well. It means the Rebbe's argument is that because there can't be a scenario of what's going to be when Mashiach comes that has nothing to do with now. If you're saying that the concept of Shalom Padah Besholom Nafshi, which means that you're functioning on the Yechidah of an Nefesh, essence of your soul, has not just that it's comparable to the times of Shlomo, but it's not something that, and if the last moments of Golus take us into Geula, you can't say that Shlomo Melech lived 2,500 years ago. That's the connection between Mashiach's times and Gullus, and so to say before Mashiach's times. It wasn't Gullus, based in English, but it was in the 6,000 years of the world, so to say. And then comes 2,500 years. There's no connection. That doesn't make sense. It has to be the mati ikvin b'ikvin. The place that touches each other in the time has to touch each other in avodah. So if we're in the last minutes of Mashiach, like the Rebbe says, Atat Kol Mashiach, the last minutes of Galus going into the first minutes of Mashiach, there it has to meet, where there's a component of Geula, there's levels of Geula in the Galus. And therefore we have to have now this idea of Padah Besholom Nafshi, of the redemption that has a level where there's no adversaries. It says, Yeshnam of Kol Afanim and Abba Avodah. Not only, he says, not only, of course, that now we have the ability to perform avodah in restraining ourselves. Even above that, to transform ourselves, but even that's a battle. In the times of Golos, specifically in our times, right before Mashiach comes, the Shalom, we could reach the level. This is where the Rebbe really introduces concepts of that where the last moments of Golos is Goyla and Geula, it's just the Aleph. So much, so it's on a thread hold where you could go from either being in Golos or Geula. You're so close. There's so little to be done to change that mindset. That we could have the highest level of Padah Besholom, means that we redeem with peace and tranquility. And almost as much as we were functioning on the revelation of the oneness of our soul. And how do we do that? We'll continue with the class, but as Hashem tomorrow, as he connects this to this week's Parsha, tomorrow's very Wednesday, hopefully we'll get in another 2 classes into Parshas Vayetze, where he starts tomorrow on quoting from the Mittler Rebbe on Parshas Vayetze, the idea of Vayashke Lavan Baboker. Okay, we're going slow, but we'll get it done. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining.